Hi, welcome to All Things Divorce. I'm Launi Sheldon, the host of All Things Divorce. And today we have on our podcast, Beth Garrow. And she is a CAA in Arizona. And we're going to talk about really why they get appointed, what she does, what she sees, and kind of how she goes about her CAA. She's super thorough. She's super great at this. We love having her in Arizona to do this. And I know there are other states that have other positions that are called court investigators and things like that. So although you might not have a CAA, which is a court appointed advisor, you may have something like that in your state or your jurisdiction. And this is probably can still be helpful for that. Again, about what I always say is listening to this podcast does not create an attorney-client privilege between you and me, no relationship. This podcast is for information purposes only. Both Beth and I are only licensed to do what we do in Arizona. So outside the jurisdiction, although this can help you, we can't give advice for those jurisdictions, and we're not giving advice here today. We're just it's an informative video. So a little bit about Beth. She has her master's of education and counseling, and she is a retired probation supervisor, 2 years in juvenile services officer, and 21 years in Maricopa County adult probation division. Is that what it is?
Yes, I retired as an adult probation supervisor.
Okay, yeah, wow. I want to have a whole different podcast about that because that sounds so interesting. But some people twisted her arm and convinced her to be a CAA in Arizona. And we are thankful for that because she's really a great one. And she really brings a lot to it with her experience and her thoroughness. So again, as usual, I will have Beth's information posted in our description in our YouTube and our podcast. So if you want to get a hold of her, you need something, you can reach out to her through. Do you have a website?
I do not, but I can provide my email address if anybody has questions.
An email address, or well, we may not want to do that. We may have to have an in-between thing so that you don't get inundated with people. But if you need a CAA in Arizona, the courts typically appoint them here. And if you can choose, she's a great one. Okay, so let's talk about this. What is the role of and we call it CAA, it's a court appointed advisor. We're going to continue to call it CAA just because that's what we call it. So what is the role? Why would you be appointed?
The Arizona Rules of Family Law under Rule 10 allows for the court to appoint a best interest attorney or a court-appointed advisor. Today, we're going to focus on the court-appointed advisor role. But ultimately, when there are allegations of abuse or neglect, and the parents can't reach agreements for parenting time or decision-making authority, and the court just needs more information. So cases that the court may appoint CA when there's significant conflict, those high conflict divorces, parents can't reach agreements. There's no hope of the parents reaching agreements. There's a history of substance abuse or family violence. When there's concerns about parental mental health, parental fitness, or the parent's behavior. The court can also appoint a CA when we have very young children that are vulnerable, those infants, those toddlers who can't speak up, who can't report abuse, and when you just need somebody to come in and kind of figure out how are they doing. I think that goes right into a child who has special needs. But the court can appoint a CA for any other reason as well when it's appropriate. That's when the court chooses to appoint a CA. Attorneys or pro pers can ask for a CA when they need that third party to come in and just figure out what's going on and be that voice to the court. So we don't necessarily have to be appointed as a decision by the judge. The parties can also request a CA.
Okay, and does that happen frequently?
On occasion, it does. I'm appointed by the judge because of the judge's decision more frequently than I'm requested by attorneys, but sometimes the attorneys will ask for more help, or a pro per will ask.
And what is your authority? What do you get to do in that?
The appointment minute entry, so the court order that appoints us gives the CA the opportunity to interview children, interview parents, spouses, significant others, adults living in the home, if there's grandparents living there or roommates. I can conduct home visits when there's allegations about the home environment if it's not safe for the child. I can conduct visits at the school or childcare. I don't conduct background checks per se, but I will run a public records check to see if there's criminal arrests, if there's convictions. I'll look for substance abuse issues. I can recommend drug testing. I'll review educational records, psychological evaluations, counseling records. There's an order for the parents to sign releases for those records. They don't always sign them. If they're withholding that information from the CA, the court can take a negative inference against that parent. I also have the authority to review law enforcement records, court records, DCS records regarding the children. And I attend all the hearings.
So, okay, so there's so much to unpack in that because I have so many questions. Are you, and these really aren't questions that are law related. They're just my, interest. Are you ever afraid when you go to somebody's house, when you do a home visit? And do you go there all by yourself?
I do. I'm used to doing home visits from my role as a probation officer. That was a significant part of my job, was to conduct home visits. So I'm used to that. I was an armed officer, so I do carry. That probably alleviates some of the concerns as well. I don't conduct a lot of home visits, to be honest. I know some of my peers will hire that out. I conduct my own when I do conduct them. But if there's no allegation about the living environment, I'm not conducting a home visit just to conduct a home visit. I can recall one recently where there's a history of DCS involvement because of the home environment.
Oh.
So given that history, I did conduct, have things improved. They had not. I made another DCS referral. So it's common, but I do conduct home visits.
So do you have, this is again another area where it's scary in your position. But I guess you had this, it's probably scarier as a probation officer than dealing with these people, I guess, because I think I would be nervous going into people's homes, going in and meeting with them and then making just, like that, if you're making a DCS report, do you ever fear any repercussion or, that's kind of, it's, again, to me, it's one of those things that I'm just a big scaredy cat.
The timing of this conversation is actually ironic. I recently actually had a threat by a parent, and obviously we took that very seriously, investigated the issue. So yeah, CAs make very important decisions for families. They're in a heightened state, of emotional involvement. This is their children. I think the family court involvement can be more dangerous than even my criminal court involvement. So yeah, it's something that's always at the forefront of my mind.
Yeah, that is something that always concerned me whenever we had somebody going in there, that, that fear, especially after we have had incidents with issues. So you did mention DCS involvement, and I kind of have a love-hate relationship with DCS involvement. I mean, I appreciate that we need a service that can get in there and help, investigate the kids, but I also feel like a lot of times the ball's dropped, or people don't understand what it means when something's substantiated or unsubstantiated. Can you talk about that?
Yes, of course. And I understand your concern. I share that concern. I think it can be easy to think unsubstantiated, this case was unsubstantiated. That doesn't mean it didn't happen. That doesn't mean that the abuse or the neglect didn't happen. It means that there was no evidence at the time of the investigation. So while DCS records and information can be very informative, it's not dispositive to determine whether there was abuse. So I use that as just a guide. It's not an end all be all for my recommendations.
And let's talk about behaviors of parents that you can find maybe concerning. Like, what kind of behaviors are you most concerned about when you're doing I don't even know what it's called, when you're doing a report for
investigation?
Yeah, there you go. Thank you.
most important thing that I'm looking for is, are these parents acting in good faith to protect their children? So if I have a parent who's withholding their child from the other parent, why are they doing that? Is it because for selfish reasons they just want more time with the child, or because they truly believe that the other parent is hurting that child? So that's really what I'm looking at. If in the end I find there's really no evidence, that there was a reason to withhold that child, I'm going to be concerned. It is in the child's best interest, typically, to have regular contact with both parents, to have a healthy relationship with both parents. So if I have a parent who's interfering with that and trying to frustrate the relationship with the other parent, that's a red flag for me. Obvious false allegations of abuse, specifically sexual abuse, are especially concerning to me. I do have a history, a background of working with sex offenders, so I take that very, very seriously. I want to know, why are we making these allegations? Specifically against the other parents. I have worked with children who have been victims of sexual abuse. I have worked with families who have made false allegations against the other parent, to gain the upper hand in the family court. Look, judge, he's so bad. Of course I can't allow my child to have contact with this parent because look at what he or she did.
Now let's back up on that, because I mean, in my heart, I feel like every parent, deep down loves their kids and they don't want to screw them up that bad. I mean, I feel like that's the majority of people. So when you find somebody who's making a false allegation like that, are they just is there a mental health issue, or are they just, do they just not understand the depth of what this is going to do to the child?
I think it can be both. I think that I've had cases where the parent really believed it happened. They genuinely believed it happened. And they really thought they were acting in this child's best interest. So then obviously we have to look at that from a mental health perspective. And then I have had parents, and I tend to get a lot of sex cases because of my background. But I've had parents who are intentionally trying to gain more parenting time, to really remove the other parent from the child's life. And when I make those recommendations for that parent's parenting time, when that's the case, I don't make that lightly. I will exhaust every available resource, and I will turn every stone to make sure that my recommendations, that I can sleep at night when I make recommendations for parenting time for a parent who's been accused of sexual abuse.
Yeah, that could be a whole nother podcast, are the resources out there, because I love helping people with resources, especially free ones. And so at one point I would like to have another conversation with you, and maybe we can do another podcast on the resources that you think are really great out there. Especially that can help a parent where there's some either mental health issue or where it screwed up the child. So I know we didn't talking about this one, but I do just want to bring it up real quick. Do you do child interviews?
I do.
Okay. And do you do those often, or is there an age, is there like a break off
older? Yeah. I interview all age appropriate children. So if I have a child in the case, they're going to get interviewed if they're 5 or older. And if I have a 7-year-old sibling who has a 4-year-old sibling, just for inclusiveness purposes, and so that a child doesn't feel left out, I'll have the parent bring in both children. I'll meet with the 4-year-old, just so that they feel included. But typically 5 and older is my personal cutoff. Now, if a child has had significant DCS involvement, law enforcement interviews, they just participated in a forensic interview, I'm probably not going to interview that child because it can be overwhelming. Their stories can change. It's scary coming in to talk to a stranger over and over again. So I do make decisions not to interview children under special circumstances.
Do you have any recommendation for what a parent can tell the child why they're being interviewed, without, to try and keep them from being involved?
Yes, when I do schedule the interview with the parent, we talk about that. What does this look like? So a lot of my children are high anxiety. So I'll encourage parents, don't tell them until the day of. They don't need to know. or if, a child really needs to be informed and they want to come up with their outline, if they're a really organized older child, talk to them. I remind the parents not to discuss the litigation, but just to explain to the child that the court wants to hear their voice. This is an incredible opportunity that they're being given to talk about their relationship with mom, to talk about their relationship with dad, but it's their voice. So when the children come to me, I remind them, I've met with mom, I've met with dad. I know what they want. I want to know what you want. And I remind them that the judge can't make good informed decisions unless they have all the information. So I start with that, and then I remind them that it's not confidential, and I give them an opportunity that they don't have to talk to me. They can say nothing, but I hope they do, and I'll be honored if they do.
Oh, that's
and
great.
I started really positive and explain that, I want to know, what's your favorite thing about mom? What's your favorite thing about dad? And I usually get the information I need.
Yeah, that's great. I know, and I don't know if you've ever pulled any of these off. I know Dr. Moran and Dr. Weinstock have that parent report card. And I'd be happy to give you a copy if it's just kind of some questions I think that they ask, but it's really kind of interesting to get to know the kids. I'm sure you have your own set of questions. So when you're gathering this information, so you've got now this big basket of information, do you compare it to the statutes? How do you work through that?
Absolutely. I conduct my interviews with parents, and then I kind of wrap up actually in my template for my reports. The bottom of every parent interview has the best interest factors listed out. So if the parents haven't covered any of them, I will ask those follow-up questions. I'll have them describe their relationship with the child. I'll ask them, what do you think the child will tell me about your relationship? But I do go through those best interest factors, their relationship with significant others, other siblings in the home, their adjustment to homeschool and community.
So you get that information from the kids and the parents. That's great.
I do.
Do you ever get different answers? Like the kids say it sucks, I hate my parents' house, but the parent says, oh, they're very well adjusted here.
All the time.
I always, kids are typically more honest, I think, probably than adults that have a special interest going on, but it's interesting to hear that. And especially the brave kids, because this is a scary thing for kids, right? They have, in some cases, they're deciding they're telling somebody that they don't like a parent, and that parent's going to find out and probably hold it against them. Because I think most parents aren't equipped with the insight to sort of take that on and go, oh, what could I do better? But they just sort of pull in.
Yes, when a child makes really strong statements about a parent, I know it's going to be hurtful or it's going to elicit negative emotions for one parent or the other, I will delay on submitting my report until I know the child's in school or I know the child is with the other parent, just to give that parent who's going to have some hurt feelings or needs time to process that, to give them that time away from the child just to process, so that the child isn't negatively impacted by the content of what they shared.
Now, again, this is not in what we discussed, and I'm not even sure it's something that you typically deal with, but I just would love your opinion on, counseling. I know you can recommend counseling, I think, right? I have kids, I've been through a divorce. So I always feel like counseling is helpful for all cases. Do you recommend it for all, or do you just sort of recommend it when it's like, oh, this kid really needs some counseling?
I don't have a standard recommendation for every case. All of my case investigations are case specific. I've worked with children who are just really well adjusted. They get that one parent or the other has their issues, and I may not recommend counseling. Other cases where I will recommend counseling, and I know that when it's court ordered, insurance won't cover it, and that's one of my personal concerns, is that I never set a family up for failure. So if they can't afford that, forensically informed counseling, and they need to go with insurance, there's times where I've asked the court, rather than make this an order, I would ask the court to take a negative inference against a parent who does not engage this child in very needed counseling.
Well, and maybe I'm wrong on this. I thought the court couldn't appoint someone specific, but they could say, the parents have to get the kid into counseling immediately with whoever's on their health provider. I think they can do that, right? No?
I don't know that, not being an attorney, I don't know the specifics of that. I just want to be really careful to not set that up for a parent to not be able to then afford it if the insurance does decline it. So
Yeah, and I
I'm
love
just
the way
really careful.
I love the way you did that backwards, that the negative inference. So it's sort of like, do it or else the court's we're not going to order you to do it, but if you don't, you're going to be in trouble. Yeah, I love that. Let me just I know I have other, so what do you think? Look, I know there's some mental health issues out there, some significant mental health issues out there. I think they're all over the world. They're certainly, in Arizona too, and certainly those people procreate. So what are the effects that you are seeing on kids when you're seeing that? Like, do the kids, are the kids parentified? Like, what are you seeing when you're going in there investigating that maybe somebody who's a narcissist or borderline is having on the kids? Do you kind of take that into account?
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges is just the lack of resources or the lack of insight from a parent to understand how their behavior does negatively impact the children. And then what I see is children who estrange themselves by choice from the other parent, and then the estranged parent wants to blame the parent
Right.
the child is aligned with for that estranged relationship, when the children are the ones estranging themselves.
Yeah, I mean, the kids, and I've had a lot of cases where I, had a sociopath, a dad that was a sociopath, that, lied a lot. And so the kid just could never, ever count on him and just was always disappointed. At some point, I'd really love to figure out what that looks like in the long term. What that looks like when that kid's 25 years old and he's not been able to count on someone the whole time because the court has decided to do 50-50, even though, this one parent clearly has behavior problems. Do you get frustrated with that too, where the court's like, let's back up. Does the court typically take your recommendations and run with them?
For the most part. I had a judge one time ask me, do you ever get offended when my rulings aren't exactly aligned with your recommendations? I actually don't typically read final orders. I don't have time. On those really big involved cases, I will. But it's been my experience that for the most part, the courts really, really value the court-appointed advisor's recommendations and information that's gleaned. So even if it's not specifically aligned, they're typically consistent.
And they're getting that information from you anyway. They just might disagree on something, right?
Correct.
Yeah, that was going to be my other question. Do you follow up with your cases? Because I'm sure some of them you have to, like, this is a crazy case. I have to know what happened.
Yeah, some of them I do. Others I testify at trial, for the first 10 minutes, and then I'm excused and I just leave the hearing and go about my day. Other ones I'll turn my camera off and just listen, and I will look for those final orders to just to see kind of where's this family headed.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, a lot of what we do in this business is really interesting, whether you want to, call it something different, but it's interesting. And, I watch other people's trials. I go online and watch other people's trials. I've been in court watching other people's trials just because I am so fascinated with it, especially when they have somebody like you that's testifying about what they found. I just find that so fascinating. And I think a lot of other people do. I think that's, probably why divorce court is on TV is so great. So are there is there anything that you don't have enough power in your order to do? Is there anything that you wish you just had, just a little more ability to do?
I think when there's active DCS investigations, I wish I could be a little more involved in gathering that information kind of in real time, especially if I'm pending a hearing and now there's a new DCS investigation, and they're hands-on, they're right there in that. And I would like to know, what are you seeing? Some DCS investigators are incredibly helpful and will, here's my transcript of my child interview. Here's, what I saw in dad's house. And others will read the appointment minute entry, the court order authorizing me to have DCS records. They'll read it literally and say, you're entitled to records. You're not entitled to speak with me. So I think that has been a frustration. I've had some judges make, really good rulings and order them to speak to me when that's become an issue, but it's not the standard order. And I'm hoping that gets changed. I've asked for that to be changed.
So that's interesting. So this brings a whole nother point that I wasn't even thinking of. Do you file motions with the court or, requests for the ability to talk to them and then have them set the order? And do you have hearings on that? And then if you have hearings on that, do both attorneys show up, or is this just you file this motion, the court grants it, and it's done?
So I'm not an attorney, so I can't file motions, but I do file notices or status reports that are essentially, they're just called something different. So yes, I do that. If I'm in the middle of a case and I have a parent who I'm really concerned that there's a substance abuse issue, I may file a notice or a request for a brief evidentiary hearing so that everyone can come to court, we can address the issue, and I can ask, can I have a rule out hair follicle test? Just because this is a concern, let's just rule it out. Or DCS is talking to me, judge can tell them they have to. So yeah, it's not uncommon for me.
Do you ever, I'm assuming you ask people to get drug tests without going to court and then they just refuse? Is that what happens? Because I think don't you have the right to ask them?
I ask parents to do all sorts of things, take polygraphs, take psychic evals. I'll throw it out there, can't hurt. If they do it, great. If we really need it, then typically, and they don't want to, I can ask the court for that order. But they typically need a court order to drug test.
Now, have you ever, I call it punting, have you ever punted to have somebody have to get a full custody evaluation?
I don't make that recommendation lightly. Obviously, that's ideal. They're expensive, but they're thorough and they really give that full picture. So I try not to because of the cost. And again, I don't want to make recommendations that set families up for failure if they can't afford it. But I definitely may imply that could be helpful. So I think they're great, and I wish all families could have one.
Oh, yeah. If every family had an extra $70,000 to spend on a comprehensive family evaluation, that would be lovely. But, I wonder, and I don't know how expensive they are. Do you ever just do like a psych eval and then use that as opposed to a full comprehensive evaluation?
The more information I can gather, obviously, the more informed recommendations I can make. When I have a parent who minimizes a lot of behavior that I clearly have record of. So for example, if I have a parent who has a history of DUIs, a history of suicide attempts, and they're all documented, a history of DCS involvement, and the parent says, no, I don't have a problem. I have no criminal history. I've never been arrested. But I'm like, Mom, I have the records, or Dad, I have your conviction right here. What about in 2019 when you had DUI? At that point, I will ask for a friendly informed psychological evaluation because the self-report just isn't going to be sufficient if I have concerns about their mental health, not just, looking for information.
Not just if they're liars.
Right.
Well, thank you so much for being on here. Do you have any maybe recommendations or advice that you could give someone who's going through, who's having a court-appointed advisor appointed, and what they could do to help make your job easier, but also help them look better?
I strongly encourage all parents to really sit back at what is their motive? Why is it because they just don't like the other parent? Or do they think what they're asking for is really in the child's best interest? Come prepared with specific examples. If I have a parent who, strongly feels that they need sole decision-making authority, that they should be able to make all the decisions for the child, be able to articulate why. If they think that the other parent is abusive, be able to articulate what they have done, when they did it. Is there any proof? So really recognizing their motive and making sure that they're acting in the child's best interest and be able to support their requests.
And support it with records, facts, right?
Yes, and just because there's not a police report or just because, there was no DCS involvement doesn't mean it didn't happen. And I've had a lot of parents say, well, I shouldn't even bring this up because I never called the police, or no, tell me about that. But if there's even if there's not a police report, what other information do you have? Do you have, a witness in the Walmart parking lot that saw it?
Or how about a journal entry or an email?
Right.
Did somebody find a witness in a Walmart parking lot?
Yes, actually, she was recording the father engaging in some bad behavior, and the witness was caught on the recording and was like, absolutely, what do you need?
Oh, wow, that's great. I love when people are willing to get involved to protect other people. I mean, that's great.
I do strongly discourage parents from recording their children, although sometimes those recordings can be helpful. If that's necessary, be as discreet as possible. Do not record these children. Don't have that camera in their face. What did daddy tell you? What did daddy do? I'm going to question the credibility of that and whether or not that child's been coached.
Yeah, I think if it, I'm not a big fan of parents recording either, even as a lawyer, but again, it is so helpful. But it does, if they just have the recording on, like I had a client who would start her recording on her phone in the car, hidden away from the kid, and no one could tell. And the kid would just get in and spontaneously just, vomit information to mom. I thought those were very helpful, but the ones where the parents are going, tell me again, what did dad say to you about his girlfriend? Tell me again, how did you get that mark on your knee?
Exactly.
And that's another thing. Go ahead.
Parents would be surprised that information comes out even without those types of recordings. I just encourage parents to let us do our job. I only speak for myself. We're all independent. All the CAs in Maricopa County are independent contractors. We all do things a little differently. So everything I've said today is my thoughts, my views, my practices. I can't speak on behalf of my peers. But usually throughout my investigation, I am very thorough. That will usually come out without having to resort to that.
Yeah, that's true. And I do have a question again, just because you said that you asked people to take polygraphs and stuff. Do you have people willing to do that? And how did they turn out?
I have. I have had one failed polygraph, and there's enough sufficient information to suggest that there may have been some sexual activity with the child. And so orders were made accordingly. The child was very young. And when I'm going to make that request, I'll typically do that, as much either as video. I'm not going to email it, a parent, will you do this? I want to call them, I want to record that, and I want to either do it like via Zoom or something, because I want to see their reaction. If a parent's like, absolutely, can I take it tomorrow? That's very telling. If a parent going, why? Well, why. So even if I'm just asking and I don't end up getting the polygraph, I still get information from the parent's response.
Yeah, that's really great. That's really great. I don't know that happens very often with other CAAs. I'm
probably not. I think I come to the table with that from working with sex offenders in probation, that it was a treatment tool, and we're used frequently. And so I'm using it as a tool here. Any objective data that I can gather only helps me make more informed recommendations for the judge.
Yeah, and that's true. And we all appreciate that. The lawyers appreciate having the information. We appreciate that you're not charging $70,000 for a report, that, 180-page report. So thank you very much. Thank you for being here. And thank you so much for what you do.
Of course. Thank you.